Welcome and hello. I am John Wize, a retired police detective. On this audiocast series, I will tell you the real story of some of history's most infamous crimes. This time we share the story of Rattlesnake James, Robert Sherwood James, the last man hung at San Quentin State Prison. The Rattlesnake's Bite, a John Wize story. It was May 1st, 1942, another foggy day for the old prison by the bay. In the high-ceilinged, raftered death house, most frequently called the hangman's courtyard, the gallows had been prepared and 98 reporters waited. It was still a big story. The hanging of Robert Sherwood James, a debonair barber from Los Angeles who had murdered his wife for an insurance payout. Rattlesnake James, as the press called him, wore a classy black suit and a white shirt without a tie. His red hair was stylishly slicked back. By tradition, San Quentin State Prison always conducted its hangings at 7 o'clock in the morning. At 6:32, the prisoner was led from his cell, manacled between two beefy guards. As the prisoner slowly moved up the 13 steps to the gallows, he appeared calm but pale. At the top, the chains were removed and his legs and arms were bound tightly with ropes, and a hood was placed over his head, then the noose. When the warden's pocket watch showed exactly 7 o'clock, he nodded to the hangman, who pulled the lever, and prisoner number 64921, Robert Sherwood James, dropped through the trapdoor. San Quentin's gallows was a relic of an older, more brutal justice system. However, for the bevy of reporters attending the execution, it was just punishment for Rattlesnake James. His friend and criminal accomplice, Charles Hoop, had told them that Robert James had killed others in Colorado before he murdered Mary Emma Bush in 1935. He said that James murdered his previous wife and his nephew, both murdered for their insurance payments. What Charles Hoop did not know, but the police did, was that Robert James had been married 5 times before marrying his manicurist, Mary Bush. Additionally, they found a large manila envelope with the names of over 200 women, mailed to him by a so-called marriage bureau, a list of women actively seeking husbands. His intentions were clear. Mary Emma Bush would not be the last wife that he would kill for the insurance payout. I have no doubt that Rattlesnake James deserved to drop through the gallows trapdoor. Yet no one realized how badly California's last hanging would be botched. An embarrassment to all the officials involved, one that caused the governor to ban the procedure altogether, bringing about instead San Quentin's infamous gas chamber era. Robert James was a classy dresser who liked fast cars and beautiful women. Despite the woes of the Depression, his downtown LA barbershop was in an excellent location next to a major hotel, and thus continued to draw top-tier Hollywood talent to his barber chair. Of course, their tips were often far more than the cost of the haircut. Robert James decided to expand his offerings to include manicure services, and he hired 27-year-old Mary Bush to do the gentleman's nails. She was excellent with his customers, sometimes flirting just a little to get a larger tip. Robert James was attracted to her and they began dating. Eventually, he proposed marriage, and they drove out to Riverside to the famous Mission Inn for their honeymoon. All seemed love-dovey between the manicurist and her barber husband, and they rented a classic California stucco house with its own fish pond. What Mary Emma Bush did not realize was that just a few days after her marriage, her new husband, Robert James, bought a life insurance policy for her, one that paid a double indemnity for her accidental death. Ominously, when Mary revealed that she was pregnant, a condition which Robert James did not view as a blessing, he began to feel an urgent deadline to cash out his investment. Mary Emma Bush must suffer a fatal accident, and soon. We are not sure how Robert James met Charles Hoop. Maybe Hoop was one of those not smart but very necessary people that sociopathic murderers so often recruit to assist with their plans. Clearly, Robert James was the brains for the murder plot, and according to his own testimony, Hoop was along just for the money. Anyway, Robert James, the barber to the Hollywood stars, recruited Charles Hoop, a nobody, to the plot with a promise to split the insurance money with him. It was Charles Hoop who purchased the 2 Colorado diamondback rattlesnakes from a Pasadena reptile dealer known as Snaky Joe. And it was Charles Hoop who kept the snakes in a cardboard box in his rented room. I personally believe that it was Robert James's $20 bill that paid Snaky Joe for the snakes. Hoop was probably nearly destitute. The murder plot was ridiculous. Hoop and James would force Mary's foot into the box holding the snakes and then hold it there until they bit her. I don't think they knew much about rattlesnakes. Rattlesnakes much prefer to slip away instead of aggressively attacking a foe. Anyway, the original plot was for Mary to be bit by the snakes and then die from their venom. For Robert James, the plot served 2 purposes. One, it was most certainly an accidental incident and thus qualified for the double indemnity payment. And secondly, it would allow him to craft an alibi and thus avoid suspicion. As I think about the actual crime, I am both horrified and astonished about the stupidity of the perpetrators. Mary came home from work and found Robert and his friend sitting at the kitchen table. Robert James told his wife that he could not afford a baby and that he had contacted a physician who was on the way to perform an illegal abortion. He told her to go upstairs and put on her pajamas. He also told her that they would do the procedure on the breakfast nook's table. He said that the physician had told him the procedure was extremely painful and that he should get Mary liquored up so she could endure it. Robert forced a bottle of whiskey onto Mary, who drank some, but soon stopped, saying that her stomach was sick. He also told her that since the procedure was illegal, they would have to cover her eyes so she could not later identify the physician. Then someone, probably Charles Hoop, grabbed her from behind and held her while the other tied her hands and her feet. Then he took off her slippers and forced her bare left foot into the cardboard box with the rattlesnakes. In his later testimony, Charles Hoop denied being in the kitchen when these events occurred. Instead, he claimed to be in the garage, waiting for Robert James to do the deed. James, in his later court testimony, said that he was the one waiting in the garage while Hoop did the deed. 2 conflicting versions of the events. Personally, I believe that both were directly involved, and both were in the kitchen for at least the majority of the time. In both versions, the snakes, named Lethal and Lightning, bit Mary Bush's foot multiple times. Later medical examinations said that she had at least 3 identifiable snake bites. Although she writhed in agony, the venom didn't instantly kill her. Neither of them knew anything about rattlesnakes or about the effects of their venom. When she did not die immediately, they panicked. Again and again they stuck her dangling left foot into the cardboard box of snakes. Robert James waited for hours for his wife to die, but she didn't. Of course, they continued to panic and, I believe, to drink more of the whiskey. Finally, Robert James became enraged and decided to do it another way. In his testimony, Charles Hoop said that, "James came to me early in June last year and said he had a friend who wanted to kill his wife, and that it would be worth $100 to me to get a couple rattlesnakes. I said all right, since it was none of my business what he wanted the snakes for." Hoop then went to visit the legendary Joseph C. Houtenbrink, known as Snake Joe, at his snake farm in Pasadena. "I've got a big bet that a rattlesnake will strike and eat a rabbit, and I want the meanest thing you've got to make sure I win," Snake Joe recalled Hoop telling him. Houtenbrink sold him 2 6-year-old desert diamondback rattlesnakes named Lethal and Lightning, but felt uneasy about the sale. Charles Hoop denied direct involvement in the murder. He told a reporter for the Los Angeles Times that he had been waiting in the garage for over an hour when he needed to go inside and use the bathroom. The reporter wrote, "There he saw Mrs. James tied with cotton rope to the top of a table, her mouth and eyes covered with adhesive tape. The woman gave only a little groan before Robert James thrust her left leg into the box occupied by 2 vicious rattlesnakes. The snakes bit Mary at least 3 times, but though she writhed in agony, the venom didn't instantly kill her." A panicked Hoop said he sat nervously in his car in the garage, while Robert frequently came out to supply updates and give the jittery man whiskey. Hours passed. Finally, Robert came out and sat next to Hoop in the car. "Well, that's it," he said. "I'm tired of waiting for her to die." Charles Hoop also told the reporter, "I walked in from the garage and saw this girl lying on the floor just outside the bathroom door with her pajamas and slippers on." He added that Robert asked him to help. "I carried her feet. He carried her head. We laid her alongside the fish pond." Charles Hoop strongly disavowed that he had assisted Robert James in drowning Mary Emma Bush in the home's bathtub. "I do not believe his disavowal. I do not believe that Robert James could carry his unconscious wife up the stairs by himself. Just as he needed Hoop to carry her body down to the fish pond, James would have needed him to help carry her upstairs. I also believe that Charles Hoop was later haunted by what he saw while watching Robert James drown his wife. It was that remorse that eventually led him to confess to the police." Robert James invited his friends James and Viola Pemberton up to his new house on Verdugo Road in the then rural community of La Cañada. The Pembertons owned a dry cleaning business a couple of doors down from James's barber shop. He invited them for a special dinner cooked by his new wife, Mary. It was a warm summer evening in mid-August, a relaxing drive away from the busy city. As they drove up, Robert James sat in the back seat, constantly talking about Mary's pregnancy and how excited he was to have children. "Mary will be the perfect mother. It'll be really terrific," he told them enthusiastically. The house that Robert and Mary had rented in La Cañada was designed by a well-known architect for a Hollywood director. Robert James had learned of its availability from one of his customers. He told the Pembertons how wonderful it was to be in the country and breathe its fresh air. He also described in considerable detail the fantastic fish pond with its large goldfish. "A great place to sit with a cocktail and relax after a demanding day at work." The trio arrived at the house expecting Mary to greet them. She didn't. They began to earnestly search for Mary. James Pemberton entered the backyard and shone his flashlight on the fish pond. It was surrounded by a dense forest of bamboo, and there was a small path leading down to the pond itself. He later testified, "I had the flashlight pointing to the other side of the pond. I nearly stumbled on the body before I saw it. I looked down and it was right at my feet. Then I turned my light upon it and saw Mrs. James lying with her face in the water. Her yellow hair was floating." Pemberton ran back to the house and told James, who immediately called the police. A police squad arrived within minutes. The police investigation was cursory. Mrs. Mary James had become unsteady and had fallen into the pond and drowned. No autopsy was performed. So no one noticed the strange, discolored puncture wounds on her left foot. Robert Sherwood James believed that he had committed the perfect crime. However, there was still one significant element that needed resolution. The insurance investigator assigned to the case was having serious doubts about Mrs. James's drowning. 3 days after receiving Robert James's claim, he interviewed the barber. Then he interviewed him a week later. The stories that Robert James told him differed substantially. In one telling, Mary was fully dressed and Robert left for work at 7 a.m. In the other, she was still wearing her pajamas and had said she was not feeling well when he left at 8:30. Robert never explained why he chose to take the red car train instead of driving as he usually did. And when the Pembertons arrived at the house, all of the lights were off. It was dark. That meant that Mrs. James probably drowned during the daylight. But why didn't she see the pond? The insurance investigator decided to visit the house on Verdugo Road in La Cañada. His first surprise was how dense the bamboo forest surrounding the fish pond was. There was only one narrow and winding path through it to the pond. You had to walk carefully over the forest's roots to get to the pond. Would a woman who, as reported to be extremely sick, attempt it? If so, why? And why would she do it in her pink pajamas and slippers? Then he remembered one of the police photos that he had seen. Her slippers were sitting on the bank. They were not in the water. Why would she have taken them off? If she accidentally fell in, they would have been on her feet. He concluded that they must have been placed there. The crime scene was beginning to look suspicious. Later, when he knocked on the door of the house, he was greeted by a scantily clad teenage girl who introduced herself as Robert James's niece, Lois. Within 2 weeks of his wife's tragic death, Robert James appeared to be cohabiting with a much younger female. The insurance investigator now had 2 motives for murder: money and a possible mistress. Back at his office, he began to investigate the prior death of Robert James's nephew, for whom his company had paid an accidental death benefit. A car the nephew was driving accidentally drove off a cliff. What made the case suspicious was that James had purchased the insurance policy only 3 months before the accident. The investigator also learned that the nephew did not even have a driver's license. The nephew had only recently moved to Colorado from Alabama and was employed at the time as a laborer in a warehouse. Very suspicious. The investigator noted the nephew's last name, Lisenba. Most unusual name. He investigated further. The man who is now known as Robert Sherwood James had previously been named Major Raymond Lisenba. The investigator found that a company named Robert James sold a line of successful beauty products. Ray Lisenba changed his name to match that company's brand. That way, the investigator believed Lisenba could perpetrate fraud as if he owned the company. When he came to L.A., Lisenba could easily pretend to be the owner of Robert James Cosmetics. Good for business. Attracted A-list Hollywood stars. However, the investigator also learned that Ray Lisenba had been married 5 times, and his third wife died in an accident for which Lisenba was paid a death benefit. The insurance investigator shared what he had learned with the police detectives, who decided to actively investigate Robert James for his very public liaison with his underage teenage niece, Lois Lisenba, who on coming to Hollywood quickly became Lois Wright. To those who knew him, Robert James seemed unperturbed by his wife's death. In fact, he seemed almost jovial. Jovial because he would soon receive the large insurance payoff for her accidental death. But an insurance company investigator began to have serious doubts about Mrs. James drowning. The most significant questions were about the 2 previous insurance settlements James had received, one for the drowning death of his then third wife, and one for the death of a nephew in an automobile accident. The investigator tipped off the police, who began to focus their attention on Robert James. The police ordered that Mary Bush's body be exhumed and an autopsy conducted. They also put him under surveillance and placed electronic listening microphones, bugs, in his home. These bugs found evidence of crimes, but not about the murder of Mary Bush. Robert James and his teenage niece Lois were lovers, and the police had the evidence on their tapes. He was arrested on various morals charges, including incest and sexual relations with an underage minor. After several hours of police interrogations, he confessed both to the morals charges and to the murder of Mary Bush. Personally, I believe that the interrogation probably included beatings and abuse, but they produced a signed confession, and in 1936 that was all that counted. A couple of weeks before they arrested Robert James, the police also interviewed Charles Hoop. He was having bouts of guilt and decided to tell all. Hoop said that after helping James to move and stage Mary's body, he took the box of rattlesnakes to his car and drove off. The next day, he returned them to Snake Joe's Pasadena Museum. Snake Joe was glad to get both Lethal and Lightning back, but he would not refund the money that Hoop had given him. Everything about it was strange, he later testified. At the La Cañada house, they found a large manila envelope filled with brochures from several so-called marriage bureaus, businesses which charged women a fee to find them potential husbands. According to the Los Angeles Times, another prize exhibit officers found in an envelope was a list of nearly 200 specially featured feminine matrimonial prospects. Heavily underscored in the list was the name of a New York widow, 53 years of age, who advertised that she had an income of $10,000 annually. Rattlesnake James intended to kill again. The trial was a media event, one of the most covered murder trials in California history. It began with Charles Hoop pleading guilty, and then telling the court that he was willing to testify truthfully about the tragic events. Robert James pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The evidence that prosecutors marshaled against Robert James was overwhelming. James felt he could counteract it by giving his own testimony. He couldn't. Although some members of the press said he was debonair and could easily be on the silver screen, but looks did not sway the jury. James's defense attorneys kept pointing to Charles Hoop as both the plot's mastermind and as the one who actually drowned Mary Emma Bush, but they could not overcome the established fact that Robert James, not Charles Hope, had the motive to kill her. Besides, Charles Hoop looked and acted like what he was, a down-and-out loser who would do anything for some ready cash. For the $100 he was given for procuring the snakes, he received a life sentence, later truncated to 20 years. The most exciting event at the trial, if you believe the press, was the escape of one of the rattlesnakes just before the court returned from recess to hear the afternoon portion of Robert James's testimony. The LA Times wrote, "Lethal, one of the rattlesnakes, escaped in the courtroom during the noon recess after James had spent most of the morning on the witness stand in his own defense. Like a streak of brown quicksilver, the reptile slid under a bookcase. His vicious rattling threw the courtroom into hysteria. Other than the escaped snake, the trial had no surprises. The evidence presented to the jury damned Robert Sherwood James. On July 25, 1936, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by hanging at San Quentin State Prison. When he learned his fate, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner wrote, "His eyes barely shifted, and he simply said, 'I can take it.'" He spent his time in the death house appealing his conviction, claiming that his confession was coerced by police torture. He also gained nearly 125 pounds in weight, going up to almost 300 pounds. As throughout his life, a woman became enamored with him. A religious woman named Helen Atkinson often visited him to bring the good news of eternal salvation through the love of Jesus Christ. Like all of the women in his life, I believe that he used her for his own ends. The day before his hanging, he told a reporter, "I can take it. Let's just say that Rattlesnake Bob James is not afraid to die." As we shared earlier, the hanging of San Quentin prisoner number 64921 was botched beyond anyone's belief. The staff miscalculated the rope length, leaving Robert James to slowly asphyxiate at the end of the rope for over 10 minutes, gagging and gasping. And of course, he did so before 95 reporters, an embarrassment to all of the officials involved, one that caused the governor to ban the procedure altogether, thus bringing about San Quentin's infamous gas chamber era. I'm John Wize. Keep your eyes open and your doors locked.